It's common knowledge that Pokémon is a portmanteau of Pocket and Monster. In the original set of 151, the Monster half did a lot of the heavy lifting. If you're too young to have played the first set of games on the Game Boy, or you haven't seen the sprites in a while, check these out. These guys look mean and are intimidating. The first time you ran into some of these, you knew it wasn't going to be an easy fight, but maybe even more importantly, you wanted one. When I was young and playing these games, I was Team Squirtle, but when I ran into my rival in Sylph Company and saw his fully evolved Venusaur, I knew I was going to choose Bulbasaur the next time that I could. I have always been happy to skip Charmander because Arcanine was out there waiting for me. Do you pronounce it Arcanine or Arcanine? Comment down below. Many of the starter Pokemon are among the franchise's most iconic members. Charizard needs no introduction, and neither does Blastoise. Does anyone not think that Typhlosion is a badass? How about Blaziken or Totodile? How many starters from the last handful of generations can you name off the top of your head? It's widely accepted that Rhydon was the first Pokemon, but in my opinion, it's also one of the best Pokemon designs in general, and a perfect example of what made the first generation so good. First of all, it definitely qualifies as a monster. He's a hulking, bipedal, angry-looking beast with a big ol' horn on his face and sharp teeth and claws. He seems kind of loosely based on the Tyrannosaurus Rex and would clearly take your lunch money, but part of his design is underrated. Any guesses? Yep, I think Rhydon has dreamy eyes, but it isn't just him. Let me introduce you to the little guy that started a disappointing trend of taking the monster out of Pocket Monster. What is it about this frog that is wrong? Let's put him side by side with an OG to make a comparison. Squirtle is absolutely cute, but in a direct comparison with Froakie, which one makes a better stuffed animal? Hold on to that thought. Now, I'm just singling him out because of the popularity of Greninja, who was voted the most popular Pokemon by players on IGN in 2020. But my problem with this fella, and some others like him, is centered around his head. It's huge, and so are his eyeballs, which isn't necessarily a problem on its own, but combined with the out-of-whack ratio between his head and body, it's an unfortunate design. He isn't the first example of a Pokemon with a big head and little body. Torchic and Mudkip from Generation 3 fit this mold a bit as well, as do Wooper and Pichu from Generation 2. But a lot of this comes down to intentionality. There have always been cute Pokemon, of course. Look no further than Clefairy, Jigglypuff, or Togepi. The problem here is that these designs are really leaning into something that has a real and actual scientific basis. A guy named Konrad Lorenz came up with the idea of an infant schema, basically a theory that a large, round head and big eyes is more cute and enhances caretaking behavior. This is like a biological hack to elevate the cuteness factor, and with Pokemon, this is a big deal, literally. Here is an estimated total gross for Pokemon as an intellectual property. $100 billion, the most ever for a media franchise. That's not surprising by itself, but check out the splits. About 2/3 of it comes from merchandise, and only about 20% from the actual games. That is a lot of backpacks, phone cases, dishware, stickers, books, Funko figurines, toys, and yes, stuffed animals and plushies. What is more likely to sell? A plushie of Dreepy or a plushie of Sentret? Remember when we compared Froakie to Squirtle? Squirtle has done just fine for itself over the years, and enjoys the special privilege of being from the original games. This is anecdotal, of course, but between the two of them, Squirtle and Froakie, only one of them is out of stock on the official store. Now that you've seen this theory, you may start to see it in action in other places. The best resemblance I have seen is probably the Tai Beanie Boo line. They basically all look like modern Pokemon starters and fit the same paradigm of the infant schema. Tai even has a page on their website specifically about Lorenz and an updated study from 2009. Target sells Disney and Barbie products in the same mold, and though they aren't quite as extreme, you can still see that the dial has been turned up on the infantile features. If you remember the viral video of the slow Loris from many years ago, you might also remember how overwhelmingly cute the little guy was. What's the first feature you remember about that animal? How about the Australian quokka with its enormous cheeks and big smile? Maybe you're a parent or have younger siblings and are familiar with the cartoon Bluey. Shout out my Australian cattle dog people, by the way. Notice anything about how she's drawn? We could probably do this all day. Instead, let's go back and look at a Pokemon. An old school iteration of cute looks like this. Notice that even though Teddiursa has a larger head, it does have more normal looking monster eyes. Another thing that sticks out is that it has a unique and defining feature, the moon shape on the face, that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with making it more marketable or plush. Those angular, pointed, more realistic looking eyes are a big part of what makes many of the older Pokemon look more monstrous compared to the puppy dog look that came later. Lechonk has overly large eyes, and with its shape, it's hard to tell where the head even ends and the body begins. Okay. Now hold up, I know what you're gonna say, but come on man, Pokemon is made and marketed for kids. Yes it is, and everyone knows that. But that was true of the first 151 too, and even with the more intense designs, that batch launched the global phenomenon in the first place. Kids can like monsters, kids can think they're cool, kids can handle mean-looking Pokemon. The overemphasis on cuteness factor as a clearly effective method to bolster merchandise sales is one way that Pokemon aesthetics have watered down, but there's another aspect to this that I want to talk about as well. As more generations have come out, many designs have been either way too busy looking, way too safe, uninspired, or outright bizarre. Generation 7 was particularly bad about this, though there are examples all over the series going back decades, like Plusle and Minun. A new design that is just safe and rehashed is Yamper. Dude, we really need another small electric mammal? Pikachu has been around since the Stone Age, and it has many clones, but there have been plenty of others too. Electabuzz, Jolteon, Mareep, Shinx, Blitzel, they even ran it back again in the generation after Yamper with the Palmy line. It would be nice to see more variety in the electric types, like Helioptile, which is some type of lizard, and Wattrel, the bird. When I say a design is uninspired, it's harder to quantify, but you probably know it when you see it. Things like Stuffle, Swirlix, Klefki, Alomomola, and the Roggenrola line are bland and boring. Maybe this is a hot take, but in my opinion, Cinderace is an uninspired idea too. A bipedal rabbit in a soccer kit doesn't fit the overall theme of the game. Bizarre Pokemon are everywhere in the last few entries of the series. I'm not sure what they were trying to achieve with Bruxish, and Ice-Skew seems like one of the designers was determined to squeeze in another penguin, but couldn't figure out how to make it look different enough from Piplup. I don't think it's even fair to pick on the Generation 8 fossils. I'm going to interject here and point out that bizarre is a level beyond just weird, and doesn't mean just weird designs can't work. Coughing and wheezing are strange, but designed well. So is Lickitung, the Litwick line, and Girafarig. I don't even mind Trubbish after Grimer and Muck, although Garbodor is pretty bad. Crabominable is a perfect example of a design that is just too busy. There is a lot going on visually when you look at this thing. Large, segmented arms, little crab legs, a bad hairdo. There are footprints on the claws, 2 tiny front teeth, and I think it's wearing some type of sports bra. There are really only 4 unique colors, but they are splashed everywhere and not really coherent. Blacephalon might be one of the worst offenders. It's uninspired, bizarre, and busy. How exactly does this thing qualify in any way, shape, or form as a pocket monster? I'm going to use an article that Riot posted a few years ago about champion designs to make a point. The gameplay between these two games is not similar at all, but there are some great points in the write-up. Even if you aren't cognizant of its influence, visual clarity has a pretty big impact on how something is perceived. In League, they use the silhouette of a champion to convey information about it, primarily the source of power for that character. This does not directly translate to Pokemon, but the general idea does. If you glance very quickly at something like Blastoise, your eye is probably drawn immediately to the shell cannons. You can recognize it even in silhouette because of how distinct they are. There is no mystery about where its power comes from. How about Machamp? It's obviously muscular and has an extra set of arms. I wonder how it's going to win its fights. What do you look at first with Magnemite? How about Hitmonlee, Steelix, Camerupt? The League of Legends article says that a good silhouette is one with a defining primary characteristic that's unique to that champion. I think this is generally true for the best Pokemon designs as well. Many of the newer designs simply lack this immediate clarity for one reason or another. Ultimately, it's always going to come down to merchandise when we are talking about Pokemon philosophy. It's easier to sell cutesy merch and stuffed animals to kids and their parents. Rowlet looks a lot more enticing on the shelf at the store compared to Arbok. Just give us more Scolipede instead of Choodle is all I'm really saying. Monsters are still cool and can still make for great starter Pokemon. They can even be cool stuffed animals if they're done right. What do you think? Are there any designs I pointed out as examples that you disagree with? Are there any combinations of types or monsters that we haven't seen yet in Pokemon that you'd like to see someday?